Welcome to the webinar, folks. My name is Alevizos. I'm a solution architect here at Satori. Just some quick housekeeping before we do some introductions and go over the agenda. If you have questions during this webinar, please use the Q&A feature in Zoom. We encourage that. Some of the material we're going to show you will probably beg follow-up questions. And so take the time to ask those in this webinar, and we'll be more than happy to answer those interactively. Again, my name is Alevizos. I'm a senior solution architect here at Satori Software, and I'm joined by Eldad Chai, our co-founder and CEO of Satori. Eldad, do you want to quickly say hello?
Hey, everyone. Hey, Ty.
Yes. In today's webinar, we're going to be talking about frictionless, just-in-time access to data. As a quick background, and we'll show you this in about 10-15 minutes, Satori is a SaaS product, a cloud service, identity and data aware, and we are in the data security business. We are dynamically managing access to all of your data across all of your data silos. Eldad, I will be happy to drive the slides here as we go through. Just let me know when to go to the next slide.
Perfect. Thank you, Ty. We can go to the next slide. So hi, everyone, again. We're going to spend a couple of minutes just sharing some concepts around data access and how changes in the market are a forcing function to change how companies think about access to data. And also, as Ty mentioned, we're going to show you some cool stuff on the product. So really kind of at a very high level, what we've seen in the market is really this trade-off between the chief data officer perspective and the security perspective. Now, this is very broadly speaking, but just if you think about data and what it serves for the company, and if you think about the objectives of these two areas of the business, in many cases, they're kind of contradicting. So from the data team side, you want to have a data-driven organization. You want to have more data to analyze, more models. You want to have more people using data. And from the security perspective, it's kind of the opposite. You want to have less data, right? You don't want to have a lot of sensitive data lying around. And you want to have it like really tightly managed and monitored, because you need to show that you're compliant. You need to make sure that that data is safe. And if you're somewhere there in between, if you're a data engineer, that's a really hard place to be at, because from one perspective, you want to grow your data infrastructure, and from another perspective, you're actually being required to scope it down. And that's kind of the challenge we're going to be talking about today. That's driving the need for a better way to manage access to data. And we can move to the next slide. If you think about managing access to data and why is it so hard, it's really around this notion of authorization. What does authorization mean? That means that basically the permissions you have on a database, assigning someone the ability to access a specific table or a specific database. Now, for many organizations, it's kind of split up. You have somewhere to manage your identities, so the different people and the groups they belong to. You have somewhere and some tool to manage the authentication, so it could be an Okta or a single sign-on. And then there is no one place to actually manage authorization. It's done on each system separately. So every database and every data repository and every application has its own permissions model, where you need to go in and implement that, and you need to have the technical expertise to do that. And then if you want to do something that's a bit more elaborate, you start building your own solutions on top of that. Maybe you want a workflow of someone trying to get access to something on Snowflake, for example, and you build your own workflow. So it's also a set of all these bespoke solutions. And at the end of the day, since it is distributed and since it is bespoke, you get really low visibility. There's no one place you can actually know who's accessing your data. And you're also introducing friction, because these are specialized ad hoc solutions you're implementing. Every change there is painful, and you need multiple teams from IT and data engineering and database admins to come together and address that, and that creates friction. If we can move to the next slide, please. And really, if I want to kind of boil it down to what is the challenge and what has fundamentally changed within the market, it's really this. So as a company, you have a policy, whether you know it or not, you have a policy around data access. It could be, the policy could be everyone can access everything, or the policy could be, I'm going to tailor a specific data set for every specific person, but you have a policy. And that policy assumes some notions around the data context, the identity context, and the access context. So there's the sensitive data, who's the person accessing, how they're accessing the data. Now, what happened in the past, I don't know, 5-7 years is that while the policy remained the policy, that didn't change. The context is changing at a much faster rate. Data is being introduced in the system at a much higher rate. People change roles, people join the company at a much higher rate, and people access data with a much wider variety of tools and ways and activities they need to take. So this context area, the data, identity, and access context change really, really quickly, but the policies are not unable to keep up with that pace because, again, every change, since it's distributed and bespoke, requires a lot of people to be involved. And we can move to the next slide. And really, that leads to, again, low visibility. Nobody really knows who has access to what. You end up with a lot of permissions that aren't being used by people that create a risk for your organization. And you're employing a lot of people to manage this monster of permissions and roles and users, creating a lot of friction without really being effective. We can move to the next slide. And really, the shift we're seeing in the market around data access management is really from this very static, upfront setting of permissions to everyone within an organization to something that is more dynamic and it's built on top of the business context. So instead of giving everyone access to a database, you're giving people dynamically the data that they need when they need it. And when you can do that, access controls becomes an enabler instead of a bottleneck. So instead of people waiting for stuff to happen, they can actually now get more freedom in getting access. And instead of having really to guess who has access to what and who actually needs something, you can do that in real time in a centralized manner. And we can talk about how that actually works in the next couple of slides. So this is an example of how you would implement this dynamic access management model for a very common use case, which is customer support. So usually customer support, to do their troubleshooting, needs some level of access to customer data. Let's say that data is on Snowflake. And usually today with the traditional approach, you have two options. Option A would be customer supports have access to all customer data all the time, because they're solving tickets, they need to move fast, there's time sensitivity there, and as an organization we want to provide a great experience. So that is option number A. The downside of option number A is there's a high risk of a breach. For example, someone can call up a support engineer and through social engineering trick them to reveal that data, and they have access to a lot of data because, again, they have access to all the customer data. And then it's also hard to maintain just good security, hygiene, and compliance. Option number two is actually giving people access to the customer data they need when they need it. That is fine in terms of security, but that created a lot of friction because every time someone needs access to data, if you haven't set this dynamic access management model, you need to call up the DBA to change your permissions. You need to go through a change management workflow. Security needs to review that. IT needs to review that. Just takes a lot of time. And then your customers are frustrated because they're waiting for someone to get access to their data. Now let's look at how this would look like if you did employ dynamic access management for your support engineers on the next slide. And this is how it would look like. So if we're talking about dynamic access management, again, we're talking about just-in-time, as needed access to data to minimize the risk, meaning not expose people to data they don't need to see, but also streamline the work that employees eventually need to do with the data. So let's look at this example. Let's say, Acme company opens a support ticket, and that is assigned to a support engineer. That is captured on Salesforce. And then what you would want to have happening is that would be a trigger to grant access to that support engineer for that specific data set, Acme data set. And then once that happens, that support engineer can go and work with that data. And when that ticket is closed, that is another trigger. And that trigger would basically revoke the permissions to that customer data and make sure that that support engineer cannot access that data any longer. So it is very effective. It's just in time. As the tickets are open, people get access, and it's very secure. They only get access to what they need, and it is revoked when they no longer need it. And so this is kind of conceptually how dynamic access management should work within your organization. Again, if you're out to minimize the risk, but being very productive and effective in data access, this is kind of the model. And I'm going to hand it out to Ty to show you how it actually works in a way that's both compliant and secure and provides the experience you want to provide for your employees. So Ty, I'm going to hand it out to you.
Yeah, that sounds great. Let's jump over. I've got a few different windows open. So right off the bat, I would start by saying everything you're about to see in the next, 10 minutes, 8, 9, 10 minutes is available to anybody on the planet. You can go to satoricyber.com/test drive, or you can click the book a demo button, and we'd be happy to walk you through that. I'm actually logged into a test drive account here. This is the Satori data steward or administrative experience. At a glance, I'll quickly, without turning this into a training session, just point out that the left-hand side reads like a workflow, a real-time, fast and easy data security operations workflow. Step 1 would be connecting to your data stores. Steps 2, 3, 4 would be creating the security, constructs. And then in real time, as your audience, your consumers of data, those support engineers that Eldad was talking about, as they connect to information, Satori starts to do real-time data inventory of sensitive information automatically. And then finally, you're seeing a dashboard here. The results of using Satori are that you have a really rich audit data of who accessed what data and what policies were triggered and what information was redacted and so forth. For the purposes of demonstrating how fast and powerful all of this is, I thought we could start in the middle, as it were, sort of a day in the life of various people using various tools to connect to various data sources. Driving all of this is what we call a Satori data set. Let this page load here. Let's see what's going on. Maybe I got logged off. There I am. And so a data set in Satori is a collection of security concepts or constructs. I have one here called secure data sources. And at a glance, it tells you what kinds of information you're securing, either down at individual table levels or across entire schemas. And really important to point out here that these are heterogeneous data sources. These are disparate. I have Azure SQL Server and Snowflake and Postgres all being managed by the same access rules. Those in turn trigger security policies, which in turn can trigger masking profiles. So there's a really strong kind of many to many to many relationship. For the purposes of getting started with this quick demonstration, I've kept it simple and said that everybody has some default policies, and that policy is called main security policy. To show you what that looks like, from the client point of view, on the next screen over, I have Snowflake, right? But if you pay close attention to the URL, it's actually connecting to Satori Cyber. So if I run a query here, you can see information's already been, redacted on the screen. And just to kind of continue this disparate, heterogeneous data silo support concept, if I switch over here to Azure Data Studio, totally unrelated data source, managed by that same security policy, or even, over here in Tableau, I'm connected to some Postgres data. And in this case, I can come in here and you can see that redactions occurred in this tooltip in Tableau. So the premise here, I'm sort of setting up how do you affect change in real time and rapidly and easily without it being, a painful process. As Eldad was pointing out, that is traditionally a multi-day, if not multi-week change management situation where requests come in and they have to be run through a process, right? So what we're going to do in Satori is come back to this data set here and explore this policy, this main security policy. If we go take a look at that, here it is right here, you can see that it has in turn pointing at different masking profiles. This starts to hint, by the way, at the pretty rich support around different groups of users needing different access and different qualitative views into their data. So everybody gets a main masking profile, but perhaps people in a certain group or with certain elevated permissions should get a different kind of result when they look at sensitive data. If we go look at this main masking profile, again, drilling into how this all works, we can see at a glance that we've decided to redact PII. These are all of the various kinds of sensitive information. Also, a very important kind of call out here. Our customers can add their own data classification to the system and then start to track and manage and use those custom classifiers as they see fit. So for now, I'll just change this word Satori to the word webinar. And this is the premise here is we've had a policy change, a corporate-wide policy change. Up until now, it was okay to show addresses, but the CISO has decided that effective immediately, we need to start redacting or suppressing address information. So I'll choose to mask everything except the last 8 characters. And we could add other items in here as well and go forth and go on from there. But right now, I'll just make that change. I've changed, all PII, and I've decided to start masking addresses. And I can make that change. And then any other changes that I make in the system are automatically happening in real time. So one other thing our CISO decided was, in addition to our main policy, we've introduced a new reporting policy. And this one's kind of like a sidecar security experience. In addition to suppressing PII or PHI or other sensitive data, we want to use some custom data classifiers that we've created just for reporting. Our CISO wants to be able to run a report in Satori and get a sense of who's connecting to what types of information and so forth. Having made those 2 quick changes, I should now be able to go to all of the client tools I just looked at and rerun some of these queries. And those changes should come in real time. And sure enough, it now says webinar redacted. And we told Satori to mask the address field, and other changes we have made would kick in real time. Let's take a look over at Tableau and refresh this Postgres data source. That'll take a couple of seconds to run. And when it's done, let's hover over here. Again, same change is made, totally unrelated database. We're not copying source data in real time. We're not making temporary tables. We're interacting upon the queries as they come through the Satori platform in real time. And then finally, hopefully Azure as well. By the way, with Azure here, I've authenticated with Active Directory. Satori is transparent to that. In the case of Snowflake a moment ago, I was actually logging in with single sign-on via Okta. And in the case of Postgres, I was using a Satori managed username and password. But you can see here, all 3 of these disparate, unrelated data silos had immediate changes based upon work I've done in Satori. With the quick comment about Postgres, and then I'll sort of pause and we can have a bit of Q&A or take questions. I had said that the Postgres connection was actually using a Satori managed username and password, and that's really valuable, right? This gets to that case scenario where a support engineer needs to be given temporary access to one of their customers, maybe for just an hour or for 4 hours or 1 day. So there is no username called ty_demo in my Postgres database. That actually exists only in Satori, and we manage that credential automatically. using a different part of our product called the data portal. A few weeks back, we actually had a whole webinar devoted to the data portal. And so if you head over to our events page and videos page on our website, you can watch that webinar. It's a deeper dive into people accessing and requesting access to data sources via Satori. So that, just in a summary sense, in just a few minutes, we started in the middle. We had an effective security policy across the corpus of all of our data, whether it was a relational data store or a more modern stack like Snowflake, or something that was using single sign-on with Azure and Active Directory. And then we effected a policy change and applied that change in real time. And the one last thing I'll point out here, actually two more things I'll point out. Everything we just did was audited and logged. So here's that Active Directory user that came in looking at some Azure data. And you remember I said that the CISO, our fictional CISO, wanted to start doing some compliance reporting. Well, that policy was triggered. So when this person ran that query in Azure Data Studio, because some of the information had matched on the compliance reporting policy, that shows up here. Similarly, so does the tool and where they came from and what they were doing and what the query was that they were running. If we scroll down here, eventually we'll see all of the other queries that we ran in this system. The last sort of quick comment on some of this that I'll point out is that everything that happens in Satori that you just saw in the user interface here has a corresponding programmatic method via our REST API. All of the configuration you see has a corresponding configuration via Terraform, which is a product by HashiCorp that we have support for. And all of this information can be sent outward to external downstream systems like Seam or Splunk or Datadog or Elasticsearch, that kind of thing. To quickly give you a view of what that might look like, we actually have been sending all of the data you've been seeing in real time. Let me quickly log into my Amazon OpenSearch server that I have running. And we actually have a Satori example here showcasing that all of the information that goes through Satori has been sent downward. This one's set up for a bit of a delay. So in the last hour, I ran these queries and you can see that as they come in. And of course, this is outside of Satori. This is downstream in an Elastic or OpenSearch dashboard. But this really demonstrates some of the integration concepts that are available once you're up and running with Satori. There was a quick question that came in, and I'll take a look at that in a moment. Opening this up for Eldad, or any quick thoughts or comments or items you'd like to add here?
No, this is great. I think I'm seeing questions coming in, so maybe we can start answering them, and specifically the first one around Protegrity. Do you want to take that, or I can take that, and also connected to the data portal, which we might want to open up to.
Yeah, I'm not incredibly familiar with Protegrity. Have you worked or interacted with them before, Eldad?
Yeah, so I can. So the question is that came in that company is looking at Protegrity for data security, and how is Satori similar or different? And I can address that. So Protegrity, as far as I know, is a company that helps you mask your data or obfuscate your data at the source, with some functionality to do de-obfuscation when the data is consumed. So usually Protegrity would fit a use case where basically you want to have PII disappear from your systems, and you're willing to take the effort of actually doing that. It's a very long implementation project because, again, you're changing the actual source of data, and then every corresponding application every tool you're using is going to have to change its behavior as well. So for that use case, like there's two levels of the answer. For that use case, Satori is different. So we did not change the underlying data because our customers or data-driven organizations, they need that data to run analytics. They need to run their dashboards. They need to run statistics. They just want to make sure that data doesn't expose to people that aren't supposed to see it. So everything that Satori does is in runtime as the data is being queried. So we're not changing the data on the database. We are modifying that based on the policy when it's being consumed. So that's a much easier integration because there's no change to the database and there are no changes to the client tools. You just put it in, apply the policies, and then if needed, we modify, we mask, we redact the way basically Ty showed that. That's an answer at around the use case of masking. A more broader answer is that Satori is a complete solution for managing access. So beyond those policies that can be implemented, for example, masking, you can actually manage the whole life cycle of access. People can be granted, revoked, redacted, changed access based on what's happening. Going back to the example of a support ticket, for example, support ticket open and someone can have access to a specific customer data set versus maintaining a huge a set of permissions and roles and responsibilities that tend to explode. So that is another difference between Satori and tools like Protegrity, where we do support policy enforcement, but it's a much broader use case. And what Ty is going to show you here is how it looks like from the data consumer perspective. So the data consumers actually have a place they can go in, they can find the data set that they need, they can request access. There is a workflow to enable that access, whether that's self-service or someone needs to authorize that manually. And then the policy is just enabled by default. So that is kind of, I hope that answers the question. And what you see here is Ty going through that workflow, someone requesting access and then an admin coming in. Again, this would be manual or automated, setting a few parameters around that access and then enabling that. And you can see that this access, for example, expires in a day. So the whole life cycle of access management moves from being something static based on permissions to something dynamic based on the business context. So again, hope that answered the question. Another question was, is the data redacted at rest? So the answer is, based on previous answer, no, it's not redacted at rest. It is redacted when it's being consumed based on the context of that specific query or dashboard, who the person was, what they're using to access, and the nature of the data. Let's see, I think, Ty, this would be one for you. Someone is writing, they have semi-structured data in their database in like a JSON format. And how do you apply policies when basically the data is not in a table and in a kind of application format?
Semi-structured data in JSON format is supported. It's kind of a database specific. So if it's Postgres or Snowflake or Mongo, it plays out a little bit differently, but absolutely supported. In fact, I should be able to go over here to my Snowflake instance and run, that's what I wanted you to see. So here's an example of some JSON information in Snowflake with partial, nested redaction, right? So JSON's pretty complex. Semi-structured data has a tendency to be, rich and complex. And so the ability of Satori to be able to go in there and correctly and elegantly parse and redact on semi-structured data like this is nothing, if you don't mind my saying, nothing short of amazing. So you can see on the screen here, we had applied that change to our policy a moment ago. We said redact the last parts of our address, and the phone number is redacted, other information's unredacted. And so this is absolutely supported phenomena in Satori.
Cool. Let's go through a couple more questions. I'm not sure we'll go through all of them, but we can definitely follow up after the webinar with whatever's remaining, and feel free to keep submitting them. We'll go through them as quickly as we can. So another question here, how do you deal with data sets that span multiple locations? The example here is I have a data lake and I have a data warehouse, and I have data on both of them that is being used. How do you manage policy around data on a data lake and a data warehouse from a single location?
That's a great question. We've been seeing some evidence of that so far. Back over here, just to sort of educate or to remind, a Satori data set is actually not a set of data. It's a set of security information about originating data sources. And under the definition tab, you can be very specific and, more importantly, disparate. And you can be heterogeneous with your locations that come in here. So I could just as easily have come in and added another unrelated data silo and be very specific about what kinds of information I want to have secured and so forth. So that's just built into the platform proper. In this case, I've got 3 on the screen here, and I'm about to add a 4th. It's as easy as that as far as managing that. Another interesting similar question that wasn't quite phrased is, what do we do in the case where the audience, your data consumers, tries to access something that I have not specified here? And in fact, at the data store level itself, there's this concept of a default baseline policy. So if we go look at the connection right here, you can say that if somebody tries to query a location that's not associated with a data set, again, a Satori data set, then what should we do? Should we audit it and pass it through and let the query continue, or should we block it? So Satori has really thought of a lot of the kind of edge cases and interesting moments in the kind of data consumption experience. We've really tried to think of all of the possible scenarios where security needs to be enforced and changed and acted upon in real time.
So Ty, there's a couple of questions here around like how are policies enforced and data in transit, data at rest. Maybe it's worthwhile, instead of answering them one by one, just talking about the integration, how Satori integrates, and then how we enforce the policies.
In integration with the original.
How do we connect to a Snowflake, for example, and then apply a masking policy?
That's right. At the very beginning, I talked about this sort of workflow from bottom up. And so, let's go back to the beginning, so to speak. And if we look at the data store connectivity experience, you click plus sign, and here are all of the types of data sources we currently support. This list is ever growing at a pretty rapid rate. In the case of Snowflake, you would click, add data store and give it a, friendly Satori name here. And the original, Snowflake host name, your account ID basically. And then, we have a pretty core concept in our platform called the data access controller. You want this to be nearby your originating data for performance and latency reasons and even regulatory reasons. So we have customers in certain regions of the planet that don't want their data to travel anywhere, and that is totally supported by Satori. So if you're in Singapore and you want your data to remain in Singapore, or the EU or America and so forth, or Canada, all of these countries worldwide have their own regulatory compliance requirements now. And so that's all sort of built into the platform. But you would click add new data store. And then what Satori ends up doing, to take a look at that same existing Snowflake connection, is we act as an interface to your originating data. This gets to the question that somebody asked, are we redacting data at rest? And the answer is no. So from a workflow point of view, people that query using the Satori endpoint It passes the query through to the originating data, passes the authentication through. So you saw, a moment ago, Azure Active Directory and Okta single sign-on, all just sort of seamlessly working in Satori. And then Satori gets the answer back from your data source. We operate upon the answers, what a database person would call tuples or the result set, and then hand that off to the client that requested it. So it's all very seamless and transparent. I'm taking a look to see if we have other questions coming through. While we're waiting for anybody who's just a little bit shy to ask a question, and please don't be shy. I'll just sort of revalidate sort of next steps here. You can head over to satoricyber.com. A ton of resources. All of our product documentation is available for you to take a look at. The previous webinars in video format, this test drive, right? Or requesting a demo with somebody from our sales team, all very easy and straightforward to engage.
Maybe we're getting to the time limit. Maybe we can go back to the slides and just kind of do a short summary. Next slide. Yeah, so we talked about static data access versus dynamic data access, and how static data access in this era of data-driven organizations is basically pushing you to accumulate more risk and accumulate more friction, and how dynamic access, which is really a simple model to follow, can optimize both. So make sure that people can get access to the data that they need when they need it, but also make sure that your customer data, your sensitive data, is being secured. I mentioned the test drive, which is a great way to kind of kick the tires and see how this could work within your environment. There's a lot of great resources on the website, including the product page with a full set of features and functionalities. There's a lot of videos from previous webinars and demo videos that can be helpful in your kind of journey of learning about a new way to manage access to data. And then we're always happy to talk. And if you want to get something that is more tailored to your needs, you can book a demo with us, and one of our data experts will be happy to meet and kind of walk you through the platform in the context of your environment. That is what we had for today. Ty, anything to add here? You're on mute, Ty.
No, I think this has been really fun. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining in. We're always happy to showcase Satori. It's a really game-changing platform. We hope you will see the power in it and visit our web properties and let us know how we can educate you more. And yeah, I think this has been great. Thanks so much, Eldad.
Perfect. Thanks so much. Thanks for everyone submitting the questions. And thank you, Ty, for doing a great demo.
Great. We'll talk soon, folks.
Okay. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye now.